So this week we're going to be looking at the idea of manifest destiny, which is the title of the chapter. But also we're going to be looking at how does the United States begin to um, shape the sort of Western frontier that the United States continually sort of pushes up against. And one of the things that we're going to be examining here is sort of themes that have been developed over the last couple of weeks, and then how do they make strides here in the 1840s. So let's talk a little bit about the idea of manifest destiny to begin with. Your documents for this week, you're going to see an article or a little excerpt from a guy named John O'Sullivan. John O'Sullivan was a newspaper author and journalist in the 1800s. And in 1839, he wrote a short piece about Manifest Destiny called Manifest Destiny. And we use this idea that he sort of illuminates here in this rather short piece, but I've only given you an excerpt of, to really examine the ideas of manifest destiny. So what is that, right? So manifest destiny, right? So the word destiny obviously means sort of this God given, this God proclaimed right to do something. And that's what he is sort of talking about here, right? We are making manifest, we are making real our God given destiny. And that destiny that he is referring to here is, you know, as as the song says, for, from sea to shining sea, right? The United States is supposed to become a continental country. Um, and you can see here, right? So, the first piece so it talks about the greatness of America, but then it says, what friend of human liberty, civilization, and refinement can cast his view over the past history of the monarchies and aristocracies of antiquity, and do not deplore that they ever existed? So again, talking about how great, how bad the stuff in the past was, but how great America is, right? 60 or so years in. America is destined for better deeds. It is our unparalleled glory that we have no reminiscence of battlefields but in defense of humanity, of the oppressed of all nations, of the rights of the country. Again, talking how great this is. And then obviously, if we are so great, then then the United States must push westward. So that's what this idea of manifest destiny is. And it comes into light here in the 1830s and 40s. So Andrew Jackson is president from 1828 until 1836, and he's replaced by his vice president Martin Van Buren. Nothing terribly important happens there, but then you have the 1840 election where you have Martin Van Buren defeated by William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, in many ways, was sort of the sort of continuation, Jackson 2.0, if you will. Van Buren was sort of seen as a sort of snooty East Coaster. I think he was an East Coast lawyer, but that's not really important. Harrison's campaign was really run as sort of Jackson 2.0. He was a war hero. Tippecanoe was his the major battle that he wins. Now, the other thing is William Henry Harrison was a bit older, right? He was um, in his 60s when he gets elected in the election of 1842, which was very old for the time, or at least old-ish for the time. And in order to show his virility, in order to show his ability to lead the nation, he delivers an address. So presidents in those days were inaugurated in March, around March 4th typically, or on March 4th, unless it was a Sunday. And when he's inaugurated in March, he gives an hour-long address out in the cold with no overcoat on. He catches pneumonia and dies about 30-ish days into office. He's replaced by his vice president, John Tyler. Now, John Tyler comes into power, and he is a Democrat turned Republican of the time, or I guess turned Whig of the time. And he winds up sort of reversing a lot of the opinions that sort of seen again as a sort of not maybe anti-Harrison, but a little different from Harrison. Um, and he also because of this he does things that sort of Whigs that didn't appreciate, right? So he vetoes the bank, and then he also um, vetoes initially the tariff of 1842. So when the election of 1844 comes around, um, Tyler is sort of ignored, and instead they put up Henry Clay. Now, the Whigs at this point are seen as a party sort of outside of the fringe, and the Democrats, James Polk, he winds up sort of swinging into office. Now, he was not seen as a very favorable candidate to begin with, but Henry Clay was even more of a polarizing figure than Harrison was. Harrison and then Tyler. Why was that? Henry Clay, remember, he's the guy who established the American system. He's the guy who, um, helps broker the Missouri Compromise. So people have sort of either a very hot opinion of him or a very cold opinion of him. Polk sort of comes in the with the middle ground, and he winds up winning the election because of that. Now, he was again, he's a Westerner. He's from Tennessee, but he's also seen as sort of again, Jackson, 3.0 or at least maybe 2.1 or 2.5, and he's really a person who. What makes him so popular is because he's looking westward, and he is saying, okay, so we here on the he's from Tennessee. He can sort of look and say we need to start looking to the western frontier. And he pushes forward the ideas of manifest destiny. And this obviously leads to sort of goals that he has, right? So what are his four goals? Polk, once he's in office, um, reduce the tariff, right? He's a Southerner. He hates these tariffs that they keep putting on manufactured goods from Europe. So he moves the tariff down. Again, Southerners hate this. He also wants to put in an independent treasury, right? Again, he's a Democrat from the South, right? He is in the Jacksonian vein. He hates this big government idea, so he is anti-bank, just like Jackson was, and reduce the sort of power of the federal government. The last two things are territorial institutions, right? Again, he's from Tennessee. He's looking westward. He wants to settle the Oregon problem, right? So when when the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory in 1803, the northwest portion of that is adjacent to, um, Canada, it becomes a major problem. So there's no sort of boundary there. So the United States needs to establish a boundary between the United States and Canada, Britain and Canada. So the United States makes a compromise for the 49th parallel. So if you look at the parallel lines, the lines of latitude, they establish the border at 49. And if you look at the United States border with Canada today, it's a straight line across the northern border until you get to the Great Lakes in sort of the Minnesota area, and or obviously then Michigan, right? And the reason for that is because of it just follows the 49th parallel. The other piece that they want to establish is acquiring California and Texas, the Texas territory, from Mexico. So a war ultimately breaks out, obviously, right? The Mexican-American War, and the United States ultimately winds up gaining that territory. So how does this all happen, right? There's a timeline here of sort of what happens, and I'm not going to sort of read through that. But what I do want to point out here is that there is a war that does take place. Texas is seen as sort of an independent territory for a bit, and then it becomes obviously part of Mexico, and then you have the Mexican-American War to acquire that. So what is important about this and the thing that I want us to focus on here is the idea that you have um, this fight for territory. That is largely a political move by the United States, right? It is American people, American citizens, United States citizens who have moved into Texas that give the United States sort of this ability to claim this territory, right? Mexico at the time, is claiming Texas. The United States is claiming Texas, but it's a lot of Americans who are living there as planters. So it's sort of a way for the United States to sort of grab this or absorb this territory. Ultimately, the treaty that's signed between the United States and Mexico, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, winds up paying Mexico for the territory, about $15 million of land purchase, but then about a $3 million reparation purchase. And again, this is a way for the United States to gain all that territory. Texas, New Mexico, portions of Arizona, or all of Arizona, I suppose, and then portions of Southern California. So you've seen this movement of territory westward. And then you obviously have the Gadsden Purchase. So the Gadsden Purchase is a way to sort of, again, establish more territory in the South. It's a way to establish more connection across the continent with the Pacific Railroad. A lot of different aspects go into this in order to expand American territory westward. All right, so if we look at the documents that are posted for the day, right? One of the things that I haven't talked about in the slides is sort of what happens to the people who are already living here, right? In the United States, obviously in the middle of the country, the Midwest, we have a lot of Native American groups that are populating the middle of the country. And those Native American groups don't just disappear when the United States wants to move west. So if you look here, what these documents are going to be looking at about from a chief of the Cherokee Nation, a guy named John Ross, and there's a lot we can talk about there with the what is his name? His name is a Western European sounding name. So these documents here sort of point out sort of how they're being treated, right? How the tribes are being treated. This is when he talks about going to Washington. So you can see here sort of how the Native Americans are being treated. We have the John O'Sullivan piece that I pointed out earlier. And then you have a woman named Sarah Bird recounting her trip across the country to Oregon, right? And you could see she talks here. The sort of style of writing, is supposed to be sound like an accent, right? So you have sort of intended or intentional, let's say, misspellings. But she talks about seeing buffaloes and moving across the country. So you'll see, I guess the theme that I'm trying to drive home in the documents here for this week are movement westward, American perception of itself, and then the treatment of the people that are in its way. Good luck. Take care.